Let's cut through the noise and talk about what actually happened here. The ANC had one job: manage basic diplomatic relations with the world's largest economy. And they failed spectacularly. And honestly, they deserve every bit of fallout coming their way. Trump pulled the United States out of the G20 summit, and everyone's acting shocked. But if you've been paying attention, I mean actually paying attention, not just staring at your TV, instead of swallowing ANC propaganda from News 24, this was inevitable. The South African government has been playing diplomatic Russian roulette for 6 months, and they finally found the loaded chamber. Here's what nobody in the mainstream media wants to admit. Afriforum and Solidarity did exactly what responsible advocacy organizations should do. They exhausted domestic channels, got nowhere, and took their case international. They traveled to Washington, presented documented evidence, made specific policy requests, and the US government listened. And you know why the US listened? Because Afriforum's case was compelling, because they had data, because they presented specific, actionable concerns instead of vague diplomatic platitudes. The Washington Memorandum wasn't conspiracy theory nonsense. It was a serious policy document that was addressing real issues. Meanwhile, the ANC's response to American concerns, not substantiated by fact. That's it. No counter evidence, no transparency, no invitation for third-party verification, just dismissal and arrogance. If your diplomatic strategy consists entirely of trust us, everything is fine, while providing zero evidence, you deserve to lose credibility. That is not Afriforum's fault, that is yours. Let me walk you through the ANC's catastrophic incompetence. In May, the Trump administration banned all US government agencies from working on the G20 conference. That's not a subtle hint. That is a diplomatic air raid siren. Earlier in the year, Secretary Rubio boycotted the G20 foreign ministers meeting, explicitly citing problems with South Africa's direction. What did the ANC do with these massive warning signs? Absolutely nothing meaningful. They kept planning their summit with its solidarity, equality, sustainability theme, buzzwords that sound great in UN speeches but mean nothing when you can't maintain solidarity with your own communities or sustain basic diplomatic relationships. They had 6 months to address American concerns, 6 months to provide transparency about land reform, 6 months to demonstrate that property rights were being respected and that violence against farmers was being taken seriously. 6 months to engage in actual dialogue instead of performative dismissal. They chose to do none of this. And then they acted surprised when the US pulled out completely. Yes, some prominent Afrikaners have contradicted Trump's characterization of white persecution. Fine. Let's stipulate that the rhetoric might be overheated. Sure. But let's also be honest about what's actually happening on the ground. Farm murders are brutal, targeted attacks. 37 farm murders in 2024 might sound small compared to 26,000 total homicides, but context matters. These aren't random robberies. These are sustained attacks on isolated rural properties, often involving torture and extreme violence. The fact that experts say the overriding motive is robbery doesn't make the victims less dead or the pattern less concerning. When Afriforum's Kali Kriel says farm murders should be declared a priority crime, that's not extremism. That's asking for appropriate police response to a specific crime pattern. Any functioning government would do this, but the ANC can't even acknowledge the problem exists without qualifying it to death. Land reform is legitimate. Addressing apartheid's legacy is legitimate. Nobody serious disputes this. But here's what the ANC refuses to understand. How you do something matters as much as what you do. Expropriation without adequate compensation creates legitimate international concern, not because it's land reform, but because it undermines property rights without due process. When business and farmers can't predict whether their property will be seized tomorrow, that destroys investment confidence. That has nothing to do with race and everything to do with basic economic governance. The ANC could have conducted transparent land reform with proper compensation, international observers, and clear farm networks. What happened to my pillow? There you are. So, you see, it's things like that. Songs like Kill the Boer that call for violence against ethnic groups called leadership. But when it's Afrikaners, the ANC goes silent or makes excuses about historical context. Imagine if any other group in South Africa had murder chants sung about them at political rallies, kill the black man. The international condemnation would be deafening. This double standard is exactly why Afriforum's international advocacy found receptive ears. When your own government won't condemn explicit calls for your murder, seeking help elsewhere isn't manipulation. It's survival. The Vatican visit perfectly encapsulates the ANC's problem. Ramaphosa stood before Pope Leo XIV lecturing about solidarity and how the strong discover their true strength, not in dominion, but in lifting up the weak. Beautiful words, Cyril, beautiful words, inspiring rhetoric. But he's saying this while his government couldn't practice solidarity with concerned communities in his own country. He's talking about dignified, prosperous coexistence while refusing dignified engagement with legitimate concerns from citizens and international partners alike. He brought books about Mandela and Tutu as gifts. The irony is crushing. Mandela and Tutu understood that you build bridges through dialogue. The ANC under Ramaphosa has abandoned that principle entirely, preferring performative speeches over substantive engagement. The analysis pointing out that small but well-positioned ideological networks like Afriforum influenced major policy outcomes misses the point entirely. Afriforum didn't manipulate anyone. They presented a case. The US government found it credible because the ANC's counter case was non-existent. That's not about Afriforum being too powerful. That's about the ANC being too incompetent to maintain basic diplomatic relationships. When citizens of your country have to seek international intervention because their own government won't listen, that's not foreign interference. That's government failure. The ANC had every tool available to prevent this crisis. They could have engaged transparently. They could have addressed concerns substantively. They could have demonstrated good faith. They chose pride, dismissiveness, and arrogance instead. Afriforum warned them. International partners warned them. The US government gave them 6 months of increasingly obvious signals. They ignored all of it. Now their G20 summit is diminished. Their international credibility is shattered, and they're scrambling to blame everyone except themselves. Afriforum did what any advocacy organization should do when facing a government that is too big of a head to listen. And that government is now paying the price for years of diplomatic malpractice. Good. Maybe now they'll learn that governing requires actually listening to your citizens, all of them, instead of just the ones who fit your ideological narrative. The ANC earned this disaster, every bit of it.